Welcome to your Tuesday Daily Delivery. I am Michael Rand. Be joined in a little bit by Marcus Fuller, who helps me break down the Gophers men's basketball coaching situation and what has gone wrong in the Richard Pitino era. I'll also spend some time dealing with some quotes from Sunday from Ricky Rubio, Timberwolves guard, that I didn't get to on Monday's show because we had a lot of other stuff to get to, but I don't want to let those pass by without addressing them and giving a little bit more perspective. But first, what did I miss? Well, I stayed up. I don't know if you did. I stayed up to watch the Wild and the Golden Knights on Monday night in Vegas, 9 o'clock start. Ended a little after 11:30 Central Time. Vegas pulls it out in overtime, 5-4. Wild had a 4-2 third period lead, could not hold onto it. All four Wild goals, even strength. Two of the Vegas goals, first two power play goals. We don't need to get into the officiating. That's not really what we're here to talk about, but the Wild has had a ton of even strength goals lately, way more than any other team in the NHL. Mostly I just want to talk about how this bodes well for kind of down the road here. I feel like this is a team in the Wild, even though their unbeaten streak ends, they lose, in kind of a showdown game, and they'll play Vegas again a couple nights from now. But this feels like a team that has something going right now. That feels like a team that could possibly, for the first time, like when was the last time you actually looked at a Wild team and said, this is a team that could probably do, I don't want to say massive damage in the playoffs, but this is a team that if they got to the playoffs, which it sure looks like they could, as this season plays out, this is a team that looks like it's got something that could be dangerous in the postseason. You look at, Kaprizov obviously changes the dynamic. Kevin Fiala changes the dynamic. The goaltending has by and large been solid between, Talbot and Kaapo Kähkönen. So they've got some pieces. The defense looks like it's coming together. The lines are solid. It's an entertaining game they play tonight. I feel like they can win a bunch of different ways. So I'm feeling for the first time in several years at least that this is a team that can't just get to the playoffs, but once they get there, could at least play a very competitive series, maybe two, maybe more. We'll have to see how the rest of the season plays out.
I'm Nyla Jean Myers, Senior Assistant Sports Editor at the Star Tribune. Thank you for listening to Strip Sports Daily Delivery. This work is made possible by our Star Tribune subscribers. For unlimited access to the articles mentioned in this podcast and our coverage of Minnesota sports from pros to preps, go to startribune.com/subscribe.
Now, we're going to hear from Marcus Fuller, like I said, in just a minute here, but I want to set up that appearance by reading a little bit from his story that's on startribune.com Tuesday morning and in your Star Tribune on Tuesday as well about Richard Pitino. Basically, I'm just going to read a little bit verbatim, indicating that Pitino has told his players that his days as head coach might be numbered. Start of the story, Richard Pitino's post-game comments to the Gophers on Saturday at Nebraska have left some members of the team believing he is likely down to his final games as their coach, sources close to the program told the Star Tribune. According to the sources, it was an emotional scene inside the locker room following Saturday's loss at Pinnacle Bank Arena. If the Northwestern defeat at home 2 nights earlier had left Pitino searching for words, the Gophers' coach went a different direction in Lincoln, delivering a message that left the team convinced he will be let go at season's end. There's been plenty of speculation and good reporting here from Marcus, speculation from others about Pitino's job status, what might happen at the end of the season. What I wanted to get into with Marcus, though, wasn't so much of the is he in, is he out kind of thing, what's going to happen at the end of the season. I wanted to know from Marcus, who covers this team as well as anybody in this whole market, what went wrong? And this is his 8th year, Richard Pitino. What went wrong here this season in particular and over the long haul? Why wasn't Richard Pitino able to build a more consistent winner at Minnesota? So that kind of provides the framework for what Marcus and I talked about. So I want to bring him in now. Good timing today to have Marcus Fuller, who covers Gophers men's basketball team for the Star Tribune, has been doing that for quite some time, both at our paper and before that at the St. Paul Pioneer Press. Marcus, how you doing?
Not bad. It's my second time doing the podcast, so I'm glad to get back on.
You're getting you're in the 2-time club now. There's not a lot of people in the 2-time club because it's a relatively new podcast. So welcome and congratulations, I guess. It's Marcus, not going to mince words. It's been a struggle for the Gophers. I'm not going to ask you about Richard Pitino job speculation. That's not your chosen direction. That's not how you operate as a beat writer. We leave that to the columnists. We had Patrick Royce on Monday to talk a little bit about that. But what I want to get to with you is where did this season and maybe bigger picture, lately the losses to Northwestern and Nebraska, just the latest setbacks after what seemed like a promising season. Where did this season, let's start with this season, kind of go off the rails in your mind? What's been the problem?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to, pinpoint just one problem. At this point, you definitely see that Pitino is not wanting to use injuries as an excuse. I mean, he said that the last 2 games. In fact, I think he said that the last 3 games and players have said it as well. They miss Liam Robbins, their starting center. He's out with an ankle injury for the last 2 games. And, there's no way around it. Ever since he had the ankle injury in the second half versus their win against Purdue at home, they've lost 5 straight games. So, he played 3 games, banged up. He tried his best, wasn't able to give much of an effort, especially offensively is where they miss him most in the post. It's surprisingly defensively for a couple games there. He was blocking shots, but then he got into foul trouble and just wasn't the same defensive presence either. So clearly in their last 5 games, not having Liam Robbins at his best and then not at all in the last 2 games really did affect how they do things. One thing I pointed out every time I do a story on Liam is that when they were beating good teams, ranked teams, he was at an all Big Ten level. They in 4 or 5 of the ranked wins that they had, he was averaging 19 points a game, 9 rebounds, and 3.5 blocks. If you put those stats on any other big men in the Big Ten, that you're talking about first team all conference type of player. So he was big in their wins. Some of the losses he wasn't so much, and then he hasn't played lately. Gabe Kalsher's injury toward the end of the season, broken finger. I wrote about before he got injured how this hasn't been a great season for him shooting the ball, but that he's done a lot of other great things. And, Pitino's talked about it, one of the best on-ball defenders in the Big Ten. And really, when he's been gone, and he's been gone a few games now, you've seen their perimeter defense just take a hit quite a bit. I mean, they can't even guard, some of the lesser guards in the Big Ten are having some big games against them. So I think if you look at this team, you talked about where it fell off the rails. I think before the injuries, you're starting to see some concerns, especially offensively. They would go through stretches where, shooting too many 3-pointers, relying too many outside shots, not going into Robbins enough. And then they were struggling to beat unranked teams, like a Maryland, like a Purdue on the road. And those were wins that they needed, to prove that they were an NCAA tournament team. So before this team really, at this point is out of the NCAA tournament mix, when they're still trying to prove that they deserve to be in and comfortably, I think offensive issues were starting to show. And, I think throughout Pitino's tenure, I think those are one of the big concerns that they've had, is that they could not score consistently. We can talk about a lot of other things, but I think those are the main points of why this season started to really struggle.
Yeah, and that's the most recent loss at Nebraska, and you can argue what was there much to salvage at that point? Maybe if they win those last 3 games, they're on the fringes at least of tournament contention. But you get 41 points from Marcus Carr in that game, and you still lose. The lack of developing more scoring outside of Carr and Robbins when he was healthy seems like a real point of frustration this season. Did you see that developing along the way, and did that kind of bite them when especially when Robbins got hurt towards the end of the season?
Right. And, I covered that story too, and how during Pitino's tenure, I know we're just talking about this season, but, the lack of depth in the front court has always been an issue during Pitino's tenure. And, you can look at the strength that they had, at the power forward spot with Jordan Murphy, one of the best all time to do it. Daniel Turu broke the NBA draft drought last year, getting drafted to the Clippers. So you look at there's been outstanding big men, yes, under Pitino. But you look at the players behind them, like when Jordan Murphy got injured in the second round of the NCAA tournament against Michigan State, and he couldn't play, they lost by 20. That was a chance to go to the Sweet 16. If you had maybe, and Eric Curry was injured that year, but, if you had someone come in and just maybe do as best he could, get, 10 points or something, I mean, maybe that game's another game. You look at the year before, it got off the rails when, Reggie Lynch and his off the court situation, he was a Big Ten Defensive Player of the Year, and it's hard to replace that. But they, behind Reggie Lynch, they had absolutely no production. We're talking about, 1 or 2 points a game. And I look back, it was surprising. If you look back at the centers that they've had under Pitino, this is his 8th season. Daniel Tour was the only high school center recruit that averaged double figures. And I'm talking about just one season in double figures. So, what we're looking at is, he's relying a lot on transfers, especially this year. Brandon Johnson's playing a lot better right now. But if you look at the center position, they lost Robbins, and there's really nothing behind them. And if you have a chance in your 8th season to develop some players, if a high school kid comes in and he's not ready to play right away, maybe by his sophomore or junior year, he's able to help you with that depth. But they just have not had that front court depth. And that's really, really come to hurt them this year. And if you look at the backcourt, they're relying a lot on a freshman in Jamal Mashburn Jr., and he's really coming along, scoring the ball. But if you look at, Gabe struggles to shoot the ball like he did in years past. And then obviously Booth Gotch, I wrote about recently, dealing with a lot with his family and just the mental side of it. But also he has an injury as well. So again, depth has been a major issue this year. And really coming into the season, you thought that this might be one of Pitino's deepest teams.
I want to get back to style of play for this season in a minute, but I think what you said just now kind of makes me want to take a trip a little bit into the bigger picture. And, you said this is his 8th season here. And do you, this lack of depth has been a theme in other seasons. Do you see that more as kind of the coming to fruition of some of the unfortunate, recruiting battles that he's lost? And we can talk a lot about the in-state players that have gone elsewhere, not even talking just about the Jalen Suggs or the Trey Jones, but, that kind of next tier down. Or is this more of a development question where the guys they're bringing in, they're not bringing them along well enough? So is it a talent question or is it a development question, do you think?
Well, to get to this point, I think it has to be a bit of both. I think that, in the college basketball landscape, you're going to lose players, right? Transfers. And then you have to fill the void. A lot of times late in the recruiting season when maybe the talent level isn't as great. So I think a lot of times what you've seen under Pitino is, they haven't been able to get some of the guys, like you mentioned, maybe the local guys or just even top notch national recruits that they're going after in the early signing period. And then they have to come back in the late signing period and basically fill a whole class or, some scholarships that they've have open because of transfers. So when you're trying to fill a recruiting class with either transfers or high school recruits in the spring period, for the most part, you're not getting the cream of the crop. We're fortunate with Liam Robbins. They're fortunate with Booth Gotch and Brandon Johnson to get them in the spring. But for the most part, a lot of their spring recruiting, it just hasn't panned out, and it's not necessarily the player's fault for not developing. Maybe those players aren't at that talent level, they're not just the Big Ten talent level. So I think that's part of it. And then you also talked about the development of players. A large part of development is stability within the program. They've had different assistants leave quite a bit during Pitino's tenure. They've had, some staff changes around that. So I think that hurts development of players. You talked about philosophy. What's your recruiting philosophy? You can't get every player in the state of Minnesota, but, a lot of coaches that come in here, they've talked about locking down the borders. Well, you're not going to be able to keep the players from going to Duke and some of the blue bloods, but you should have probably a recruiting base here in Minnesota of kids that you feel like fit in your program, fit in your style, and then continue to recruit those kids. And I think part of the reason there's no depth on this team is because he's not had a recruiting base in Minnesota. So you rely on kids that aren't from the state. And maybe when they're not playing as much, they transfer. And then when the state is really deep with talent, you're not able to tap into that with players that fit your style, your system, your program, that want to make the University of Minnesota a program to contend with, and they'll stick around for their entire career. Michael Hurt is the only recruit that stayed here for 4 years out of Minnesota from high school.
Wow. I didn't realize that. That's amazing.
And he graduated last year. It was a tough time for him, obviously, but he stuck it out. And so I think local recruiting obviously has hurt this program's depth, transfers, not being able to sign those early kids that can really make a difference. Daniel Turu committed when he was a junior in high school. Amir Coffey committed, well before the early signing period. They really lucked out on Jordan Murphy. He was a spring recruit. I think Jordan Murphy's the lone spring recruit, high school recruit, that ended up being a starter for them for 4 years and becoming obviously one of Pitino's best players. So, recruiting has been a big issue for this program and why it's here right now. And, the development side of it, I think it's more the big men than anything, because we're in the Big Ten and you need those physical post presence that really can, if you're not shooting the ball well, you can still rebound and you can still protect the paint. And especially now in the Big Ten, you see they're just producing some of the best in the country with, the Luka Garzas and the Kofi Coburns of the world.
I'm a little confused with what their style even is, because they've really transitioned into being a heavy reliance on 3-pointers this year. And maybe in part that's defense is realizing that's, they're not great at it. That's the shot they're going to give them, as opposed to, letting Marcus Carr drive, as opposed to letting Liam Robbins operate in the post. And Liam Robbins can still hit threes too. But, and then Pitino's even lamented that they shoot too many threes. But, how did they become this team that shoots a lot of threes but doesn't make a lot of threes? And is that their identity right now? Or how would you describe their identity?
Well, I would say that, I don't know if it's an identity to be the worst Big Ten shooting 3-point team, but
it's a thing. It's not an identity to put on a business card. That's for sure.
Exactly. Yeah. But that's kind of what they've been known for, right? I mean, that's what we're always talking about. Like, they shoot a lot of threes. Why are they continuing to shoot a lot of threes? Well, I think part of it is because, so if you go into every game, you have your game plan, right? And obviously most of the teams that play Minnesota will say, hey, they're the worst 3-point shooting team in the Big Ten. We're going to force them to shoot a lot of threes. So they'll play zone, they'll dare them to shoot it. And they do. Well, most teams that if you want a chance to be competitive, you'll say, hey, let's have our style and make the other team, figure out how to beat it. And so I think that they're playing into, okay, we'll take what the defense gives us, but that's not really an identity like what you said. I think going through Marcus Carr and having a ball dominant point guard that's hard to stop, I think that's part of the identity of Gopher basketball under Pitino. If you look back at the Nate Masons, and even, he inherited Andre Hollins, but Andre Hollins was that type of guard. DeAndre Matthew, Marcus Carr is the heir apparent right now, and then Jamal Mashburn Jr. looks like that as well. So I think if you look back to Pitino's era, I think those ball dominant guards that have a chance to score 25 to 30 points a game, if you give them the opportunity and put the ball in their hands, I think that's kind of what the style is. But is that a winning style, especially in the Big Ten? I think if you have a guard-oriented team and attack, there's some other conferences, Pac-12 or even, maybe Big East, that might win. But here in the Big Ten, obviously they slow the pace. It's hard to get in transition. I think that's part of the reasons why a lot of times that they aren't shooting threes very well. Transition threes are some of the best times to get it, and then I think that this team has an identity crisis because they've had a couple big men here and there, like a Jordan Murphy or Daniel Turu, where like, wow, we can throw the ball inside like a Liam Robbins, and we can become a team that's more equipped to play in the Big Ten in the half court set, right? But that's not their style. That's not how they've recruited. And so I think there's if you watch, Daniel Turu and Marcus Carr play with one another, there is whose team is this? You know what I mean? Yeah. I mean, last year it was at the end of games, Marcus Carr maybe tried to win it. Maybe they should have gotten it into Daniel a little bit more. I'm not a coach, and obviously Daniel's a great player. So is Marcus Carr. Those are decisions that the coaches have to make this year. Who do we rely on? I mean, if you look, like I said, look at the big games. Liam Robbins he was huge. He was an all Big Ten type of player. Marcus Carr, 41 points versus Nebraska, and they don't beat Nebraska, but he also had 30 versus Iowa, and they pulled that one out. So I think the balance between a ball dominant point guard and guard oriented attack, and then having a post that you can contend with, help you contend in the Big Ten. I think that balance has been really tough for them to figure out what their identity is. And really, sometimes you just want to play to your personnel, right? And I think, under Pitino, they've had better guard depth than they've had in the post. So he hasn't had the posts to be able to play the style that I think can win consistently in the Big Ten, and he's had to adjust to that.
Last thing for you, you talk to more Gophers fans than I do, even though I hear from plenty of them too. What do you sense is the sentiment right now, or the frustration level, or where are they at with this program from the people that you hear from the most?
Well, you probably hear from them as well on social media, but I think for the most part, everyone just wants to see this program take the next step. And there was points in Pitino's career where it seemed like it was close to that. 2 years ago, they won their NCAA tournament game, beat Louisville. Recently, a Big Ten Network social media post on Twitter talked about what your favorite March Madness moment was, and I decided to post a picture of Gabe Kalsher with the guitar strings, plugging them along after he hit 5 threes versus Louisville. That was a big moment because that was a game close to the Twin Cities in Des Moines. So a lot of fans came out there. It was a huge Gopher crowd. Excitement, they lost to Michigan State in the following game, but in that game, you kind of saw maybe the future. You had a lot of Minnesota players on the court with Daniel Turu and Gabe Kalsher and Amir Coffey. And so I think that maybe not being able to build off of that is really frustrating Gopher fans right now, because they didn't think that this program would be in this situation where it is, where it's losing to two of the best or the worst teams in the Big Ten with a chance to go to the NCAA tournament. And you can talk about injuries, but I don't think they want to hear that anymore. I think they want to see this program take the next step. And, I think if injuries happen, then that means, you have to have other players step up and try to, make the season still a special one. And that hasn't happened. So, obviously Pitino hears from fans a lot. He's heard it throughout his career as far as the criticism, and that hasn't changed. And really, he's coached through that a lot of times. But right now it's been really tough for him and for the team, to continue to try to build momentum, even though the season right now is not gone how they want it to.
Marcus, great stuff. Better than the Gophers have looked lately. You're always on point. Thank you for joining me today on the Daily Delivery Podcast, and I'm sure we'll talk to you again soon as the season comes to a close.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Good stuff from Marcus as usual. We'll hear from Richard Pitino at some point on Tuesday. He's supposed to speak in advance of the Gophers' final road game of the year, Wednesday at Penn State, their last chance to get a road victory all season, have not won on the road, which is a big part of not only their downfall this season, but their downfall under Pitino in the Big Ten. I think 14-60 is the mark in Big Ten road games during his coaching career to date. So we'll probably hear more from Pitino in that. I would imagine, though, we're not going to know anything definitive about his job status, at least until the final game of the season, Saturday against Rutgers. That's not really how Mark Coyle, the AD, operates. That I can't imagine anything's going to happen officially until then. So we'll see how this all plays out. But again, great stuff from Marcus, and continue to follow that story, Star Tribune and StarTribune.com. All right, I want to play you an extended clip now from Ricky Rubio Sunday night after they lost to the Phoenix Suns. Timberwolves, another lopsided loss, third lopsided loss in 4 games under new head coach Chris Finch. A lot of lopsided losses this season. Wolves are 7-28. Just really limping through this season, especially lately. So here's what Rubio had to say, and then I want to talk a little bit more about kind of the meaning behind those words, at least in my eyes.
There is an evidence that it may work, like happened with Philadelphia, I guess. Trust the process when they win like 2-3 years really bad, and then they start winning. But I kind of don't believe in that kind of system. You had to build good habits from day one, and I don't think we are in the right way, to be honest. And I can be here and be positive, like we trying to be, and it's okay. But we have the worst record in the league. We lost way too many games by 20 plus, and I don't feel like this is building something. It's hard. It's you always have to take positive things, and of course we will watch film, get better. But at one point we gotta start doing or start uh, wanting to change something, and it's not happening.
Okay, so what's Rubio's kind of angle in all this? What's his end game? The easiest answer is the simplest one, right? That he's just a frustrated player. He's tired of losing. There's been a lot of it going on this season. He says there's a lot of things we have to figure out and correct and get better. I've got to lead better. Karl Anthony Towns, everybody's got to do a better job. So basically, right off the bat, the easiest explanation is the plain one, right? The one where he's saying, I'm tired of losing. Basically, we got to do better. Let's turn this around. Let's get this corrected. Let's have some practice time. Let's figure this all out. I also get the sense that he's probably saying, I'm a veteran leader on this team, right? If someone's got to say something, I'm going to say it. But I think the message is also a little bit more complex than that he's not just critical of the way that the Wolves are, not just critical of the Wolves losing, he's critical of the way they're going about it, the way they're going about building their roster and losing, as a part of this whole process. He invokes, the Philadelphia trust the process, says, they went 2-3 years really bad, then they started winning. I don't really believe in that kind of system. We have to build good habits from day one, and I don't think we are in the right way, to be honest. Now, I've talked about this on the podcast before. I think they could win more games if they played a style that was more conducive to their current personnel. They're playing fast. They're letting it fly. They shoot a lot of threes. They don't make a lot of threes. They're playing the way they want to eventually play when they have different players. And whether that's building good habits is, a subject of debate, but Rubio at least seems to be saying that the intended consequences are not happening right now. Do you guys know that Karl Anthony Towns, by the way, is 4-30 in the last 34 games he's played with the Timberwolves? I mean, something's not going right here. Last thing, though, Rubio's never part of a winning culture in his first go-around with the Wolves. By the way, NBA Reddit saw this. A couple people sent this to me. Wolves now have the worst all-time winning percentage of any active major pro sports franchise in, I think it's North America, 393. They edged out the Super Bowl champion, but often terrible Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So they're now 393 all-time. Now the Wolves with Rubio, he's played 386 games now for the Wolves, 386 winning percentage when Rubio plays. That's even worse than the franchise mark, but he did escape that once, right? He got traded away to Utah. People were sad, but it was time for him to go. 3 seasons away from Minnesota, he won more than he lost, 116 and 94 for those teams. He went away. He saw what a winning culture looks like. He knows this isn't it, at least not right now, and I don't think he has any interest in suffering through a rebuilding quote-unquote process. So maybe the final piece of what he's saying is a plea. Get me out of here. I don't know if that's going to happen. I don't know what would happen in the trade market. Deadline's a few weeks away, but surely both of these sides wanted a happier reunion when this trade was made a few months ago on draft night. It hasn't worked out for the Wolves. It hasn't worked out for Rubio. He's never looked fully comfortable. So, I mean, if the Wolves can hire a head coach from a different organization in the middle of a pandemic season, nothing to me is off the table. Now, again, most of this is probably just Rubio expressing his frustration. Everybody could probably use a break, but I'm watching for the subtext in all this, and I'm watching to see if it gets even uglier when that break is done. Let's end things with the cooler. Shout out to Megan Ryan, our new Twins baseball beat writer. She will share that beat with Phil Miller. Vacancy opened up when Lavelle E. Neal III was promoted to columnist, a role which he has just started. And in fact, Lavelle will be on Wednesday's Daily Delivery podcast along with Twins general manager Thad Levine. That Megan, hopefully we'll get Megan on the show soon, maybe even later this week. But congrats to her. Looking forward to what she brings to that beat, the energy she will bring to that beat. So congratulations to Megan. Look for her work. She did cover the 2019 Gophers football team, the best in that program's history in a long time. So maybe she will be the one to cover playoff win, maybe for the Minnesota Twins. You never know. We'll see. So congrats to Megan, and everybody go follow her work when she starts on the beat later this month. That'll do it for today. Thank you so much for listening to the Daily Delivery Podcast. Subscribe, read Star Tribune, StarTribune.com, and we will be back at this again on Wednesday.